Daniel.
So funny. Well, good morning. Today is the second Sunday of May, which makes today Mother's Day. And I understand, ladies, that can bring a mixed bag of emotions for us. For some of you, you love today. You could not wait to get to tell Mom how much you love her and do all kinds of nice stuff for her. And for kids, we get to say, thanks, Mom, for all you've done for us. And I know for others, when we say Mother's Day, you have to take a deep breath and be like, oh, can we just get today over with? You know, for me, I celebrate Mother's Day because I have my mom. My mom is with me for 10 extra years, longer than I thought I was going to get 10 years ago. And I am a mom. I have 2 boys who call me mom. So Mother's Day is a good day for me. It's also a day that can bring some sadness as well. I miscarried 2 babies before Austin, and it was rough. Steve's mom went to go be with Jesus long before we ever planned. And so that first Mother's Day, I did not want to get up. It was my first Mother's Day as a mom to Austin, and I just wanted to stay in bed. I just wanted to stay in bed and feel sorry for myself, but I didn't. I got up, I got dressed, I went to church. It wasn't the greatest day, but it was still one of those that I had to pray, and I asked God, God, can you redeem this day? I don't want to live every Mother's Day hating the day. So I asked God, is there a way that I can use what has happened in my life to help others? So wherever you are today, so I do say Happy Mother's Day to the moms, to the aunts, to the grandmas, to all who have taken an important role in a child's life. And for those of you who today is a little rough, know that you're loved. God hasn't forgotten about you, and He's with you. Well, I am Robin Harper, and as Pastor Wynn so kindly told you all last week, I am an introvert. So let me tell you what an introvert is. First of all, there's extroverts. And extroverts get their energy from being around people. They love, the more people, the better. I mean, they're one of those, bring on the crowd, bring them all on, and if there's not a crowd, they'll go find more of a crowd because they just love it. And introverts get their energy from being by themselves. So they like to be around people, but then there comes a point, it's like, okay, I gotta go recharge my batteries here. And so that is the difference. Now, the other thing to know about introverts is that when they're done talking, they're pretty much done. So that could be really good for you guys today because this could be just short, sweet, and straight to the point. But the other thing you need to know about introverts is we really do have a lot to say, and so I don't have any extroverts to fight for airtime for today, so you decide. Anyway, I do have many different titles, and one of those is being online campus pastor, and I was sitting here on the front row with my phone hosting the online campus, so I've already texted and said hi to them, but hello, online campus, it's good to see you all today. Don't forget, log in, be sure to tell the hosts that you're there, they want to say hi to you. Also, I want to say hi to Enon. Hi, Enon, it's good to see you guys today. And for all of you here, usually when we host the online campus, we're upstairs, and I'm with the online campus team. And so sometimes we get to see the back of your head, so it's nice to get to see you guys from the front today. So do you know someone who's perfect? They have their life all together. Like someone who, if they have to throw a party together at the last minute, it's perfect. It looks like one of those Pinterest dream boards. You know, they've got all the cute little decorations and the cupcakes with the nice little swirls and all of that. Or the friend who's rising the corporate ladder, they've got the best job, they're married to the best spouse, they live in the great neighborhood, they're driving the cool car, their grass is that perfect shade of green, and right now it doesn't have all those little stringy things sticking up out of it because of all this rain. You know what I'm talking about. They never seem to have anything go wrong in their life. They don't get rattled by anything. You know those kind of people? Well, I don't know about you, but I have never been accused of being perfect. I have meltdowns, I say stupid stuff, I have been known to blow it. I'm pretty much never mistaken for someone who's perfect. Can you relate? Maybe you don't have to think too far back in your history to be like, oh yeah, I completely blew it. I would guess that if we went and told our perfect friends that we thought they were perfect, they would be like, oh my goodness, come live in my world for a day. You'll see there's nothing perfect going on around here. Well, speaking of perfect, many people look at this life of Daniel that we're studying right now and say, oh, well, this guy was completely perfect. He was a normal guy, just like you and I, and he had to deal with life. He had things that he struggled with. He had to deal with things. So we are in this message series looking at Daniel. Now, last week, Pastor Wynn started off giving us a look at Daniel's life. He was determined, he showed discretion, he was dedicated, and decisive. Now, if you missed hearing the message, you can go back and you can rewatch it. We have it on the Southside Church website. We also have it on the Southside Church app. Just go to the media section of both and you can rewatch it there. So the part of Daniel's life that we're looking at today is Daniel chapter 6. And there's a whole bunch of places where you can find it. It's printed, it's in your bulletin notes in the bulletin. If you want to get it on the app, you can get it there. Online, you guys go click that little notes section right below the chat. You can follow along there. So Pastor Wynn started us off looking at Daniel's life as a teenager. And today we're going to jump ahead a whole bunch of years and we're going to go to Daniel as a senior adult. So we're in Daniel chapter 6. And this is the story classically known as Daniel in the Lion's Den. Now, to be honest, whenever I thought of Daniel in the Lion's Den, I never pictured him as a senior adult. I always put him as a young adult, maybe quickly after he had been taken into captivity, but as a senior adult, my mind never went there. If you look at some of the commentaries out there, they say that he might have been in his 80s. Now, I have lots of plans and dreams and things for my life, and my 80s is going to include living somewhere warm, having an RV, traveling the country, maybe even the world, nothing to do with a lion's den. But that's what Daniel was dealing with in his 80s. So what I want to do is, the video we just showed, sometimes we talk about Daniel in the lion's den, we can go through it really fast, and I want to slow it down today. I want to go through verse by verse, and we're just going to kind of talk about what was going on here. So we're in Daniel chapter 6. We're going to start with verses 1 through 3. Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. All right. So here we see Daniel. He's risen to power. He was in this foreign country, so much so the king's going to put him at number 1. So here's the king, here's Daniel right behind him. That's what happened in his life. But as every good story has, there's a plot twist. So in verse 4, then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was always faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Now, as Pastor Wynn said, I do get to speak to the teenagers, and this is like middle school highway drama right here. You know what I'm talking about? Or maybe this year's political campaign. It is the green-eyed monster of jealousy showing up, and these guys are determined to knock Daniel off this pedestal that the king has put him on. So verse 5, so they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. All right? They dug, they looked for dirt, they tried to find something for the gossip tabloids, and there was nothing there. As a senior adult, he had grown up with these people. He started there as a teenager when he was taken into captivity, and they saw his whole life, and they knew, we've got nothing on this guy. The only way we're going to get him is on the grounds of his faith. Okay, now I have a big imagination, and I like to kind of dream up things. And so this next part, I kind of picture it like a play. Okay, so you know when you go see a play and they're trying to depict the villain, the lights get kind of dark and you see this person moving in the shadows and maybe they're kind of slinking along. They talk with a hiss and they're kind of wringing their hands. You know as the audience that these people are up to no good. And that's how I picture this next part. So Daniel 6 through 9. So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, long live the King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, well, of course, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And now, your majesty, issue and sign the law so it cannot be changed, an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. So King Darius signed the law. Talk about some egos here. And not just the guys who went to the king, but the king himself. Again, in my imagination, I picture the king, and he's got this big throne, and he's got his crown on, and he's got his robe, and he's got all his rings, and he's listening to these guys, and he crosses his arms, because he can't get too excited, And he kind of nods his head. Wow, this is the best thing I've heard all day. Man, these guys are good. See, that's why I put these guys in charge. That's how I totally picture this thing going down. And then the struggle. Verse 10. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. All right, Daniel clearly knew what he was doing. Remember, here's the king, here's Daniel. He's number 1 in command. He would be the first person who's going to be told of any new law. So it wasn't like he couldn't just be like, well, I didn't know. It's not like the boys in my house who are after the 5 bazillionth time of me asking them to do something. Oh, I didn't know. I didn't hear you, Mom. No, none of that stuff. He was clear about what he was doing, and he knew the consequence that it would bring. Now, I love to read, and I drive my family crazy because I have books everywhere, stacks and stacks and stacks of books. I just bought a new book this week, and they're like, really? Another book? And when I read, I maybe will even have multiple books going at one time. So I like reading books because you get to know what's going on behind the scenes. You know, there's a wind blowing, you kind of know the history of people. When I go to a movie, if I've read the book, I even drive Steve more crazy because I'm like, oh, they forgot this part, and oh, they didn't say that, or that's not the person I would have chosen for that. And he's like, can you just enjoy the movie? I'm like, sorry. So this is one of those stories I really wish was in that first-person narrative, that we could know exactly what's everybody thinking, what's going on, and even looking at what was going on in Daniel's head, but we're not. So we're left to wonder, what was he thinking? What was going on in his head? Was he wrestling with this? Was this kind of one of those, should I obey it, shouldn't I? Did he kind of look at this as, well, here's man's law, here's God, man, God, well, God's going to win out on this one. Did he look at his past, consider everything that he had gone through, and been like, well, either God's going to save me from this lion's den, or I'm going to be in the presence of God. Both are pretty awesome ends, so whichever happens, happens. And then I think of these things myself, kind of the loopholes. Why didn't he look for a loophole in this? Why didn't he just go up and go to a closet and pray? Why did he have to leave his windows open? Couldn't he have just kept them shut? Why couldn't he have just prayed while he was walking along? Or when he was eating dinner, you know, kind of one of those, dear Jesus, bless the food sort of things. Why didn't he do any of that? Why didn't he just go on vacation? I mean, he could have just left town and gone somewhere to pray and nobody would, but he didn't. He didn't look for a loophole. Now, could you imagine what we would remember Daniel's life for today if he would have looked for the loophole? If we even talked about him, at best, we would say, well, he was this guy who was taken from his country. He rose to power. That's about as good as it would get. At worst, we would talk of the tragedy of his life. Well, there was this guy, and he was ripped from his country, and he was forced to be with all these, you know, other rules and other stuff, and when the pressure came on, he caved. How sad would that be? But as we learned last week, he was determined. He took a stand against the temptation of his own comfort, his own life. He was dedicated to being truly obedient to God. He knew his choice was going to bring this clearly defined punishment, and he prayed anyway. So you may be thinking something right now like, this guy was perfect. I mean, perfect life, perfect devotion, perfect everything. He lived a long time ago. Seriously, how am I supposed to relate this to my life today? Nice story, but it's not what I'm having to deal with today. Well, let's do a quick review of his life. Again, he was kidnapped as a child, taken into a foreign country. He was taken away from everything he knew. He was forced to learn all these new laws and everything of this new country. He had to serve under these kings who were egotistical, self-centered. They wanted them to bow down to their own gods, and if they didn't, they would be forced, they would be put to death. There was pretty much far from having a perfect life. But what he did have was faith, determination, a devotion to God. He had a perfect surrender to God. And I want to change our definition here of perfect. Usually when we think of perfect, we think of flawless. I want to change it to complete. He had a complete surrender to God. Whatever happened, he trusted in God. All right, now we're on to verse 11. The officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. Busted. Daniel was caught red-handed. He was there, he was praying, and he was seeking and asking God for help. He was in direct violation of the king's command. So what do we do when the pressure's on? When a clear injustice has taken place? When it's obvious that there has been a trap set? When the trials of life come? Well, if you watch the news, read the paper, watch the talk shows, find stuff in your social media feed, that answer is pretty easy. Our world has told us we must fight back. Don't take anything lying down, defend ourselves, make the wrongs right. So we write letters, we protest, we blast it on social media. We will talk with whoever will listen. We do everything to make it right, no matter what the trial is. We're going to take control and we're going to fight. Or we take the other extreme. We just back down, give in, whatever. I'm not going to mess with this. You guys just, whatever. I'm just going to go with the flow. It's easier to go along with that. All right, I want to reread verse 11 again. They found him praying and asking for God's help. There is nothing wrong with fighting for justice, for righting the wrongs, for standing up for those who can't talk for themselves, for fighting for the wrongs. It's when we do it on our own. It's when we take matters into our own hands. Now, would Daniel have pled his case? We don't really know. We don't really know how long it was from when the law was put into place to when they caught him praying. But I would guess that maybe he wouldn't. He was spending that time praying and asking God for what he should do. So what we do know is that when the trial came, he took it to God in prayer. He asked God for help. So the story moves on. The accusers take Daniel before the king, and they're, "King, here's your law. You said," and here's what he was doing. And they were very quick to remind the king, and don't forget, he's got to go hang out with the lions. And by the king's response, he knew he had been had. Maybe he had, the steam coming out of his ears, his face real red. He knew he was set up, and he took the bait. And there was not a thing he could do about it. So Daniel's arrested, and the king, recognizing that this is his fault and the only person that can help him now is the God that Daniel prays to, says to him in verse 16, "May your God, who you serve so faithfully, rescue you." So Daniel goes in with the lions, stones put over the entrance to the cave. It's marked with the king's seal. And the king goes back to his palace, and he fasts for the night. Now, at some point in each of our lives, we've all faced trials, tests, rough times, whatever you want to call them. And nobody's story is the same. There may be some similarities, but your story isn't my story, and mine isn't yours. There's been things that we have all dealt with. Some of you have dealt with life-threatening things. And others, your life may not have been on the line, but what you dealt with in the past or what you're dealing with is huge. It's big. It's overwhelming. And it may have caused you to doubt your faith. Doubt if God would or could come through. Or maybe even wonder if there was a God at all. Now I want you to hear from Joseph Solomon. He's a young man who is wrestling with his faith and how he hears God's response to him.
I remember my little niece ran up to me and told me, "We learned about Jesus today." And I could tell by her excited to learn about this man that she did not quite know yet, but she knew without a doubt for it to be true, because after all, Mommy said so. And that was the first time in my life that I looked into the eyes of a child and envied them, because she had no idea of what it feels like to doubt. What it feels like to have your entire belief system overload with skepticism, to never know the day that you would finally be able to live beyond the shadow of a doubt. I've lived in its darkness for so long. It seems like I have all the right questions, but never enough answers, and my faith is small enough to fit in the cracks of my palms. God, every night I lay my head down to sleep, the city of my mind is attacked by a legion of questions, threatening the living rooms of my sanity and holding them hostage. Can you help me? Last year, my grandmother laid in a hospital bed like a bus stop, waiting for God to come pick her up. I had never seen such pain and such confidence living in the same eyes when she told me, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I know who I belong to, and I was so happy for her. And something inside of me wished that somehow before she passed away, she could pass down her confidence in God to me like an old family picture. I remember sitting in the back row of a cold sanctuary, crying, because I desperately wanted what the preacher was saying to be true, but my doubts were preaching a sermon of their own, and the streams of my tears turned into oceans of frustration. I remember sitting in a college classroom, and the only thing being tested is my faith in God. The only thing passing is my hope. Me, in a backpack full of fear, and nowhere to go. My child, when it seems like you have all the right questions, but never enough answers, and your faith is small enough to fit in the cracks of your palms, I told you. Faith the size of mustard seeds can rearrange whole landscapes and turn mountains into open highways. Faith comes by my word, so maybe you've cuffed your ears. My child, don't be childish. But consider the child whose faith has not quite learned the definition of impossible. Have your questions. I'm not telling you to have a blind faith. I'm telling you to consider the blind men who had faith and believed my words before they were even able to see me. Consider the birds that eat from my hand and do not fall from the sky without my consent. So how much more will I love the ones that I died for? Before you doubt me, doubt your doubts.
Doubt your doubts. As an adult, have you ever doubted your doubts? Have you ever had doubts? Daniel was an adult. Let's not assume that he had it all together. He probably had doubts of his own. I wonder, when he was sitting in the lion's den, was he doubting God? Are you there? Is this really how my life is going to end? Are you going to come through this time? Was he wondering if his lifetime of devotion to God was for nothing? Did he think God had forgotten him? What about you? Have you ever questioned if what you're doing is even worth it? Have you wondered if you were being proverbially thrown to the lion's den and asking God, where are you? Have you felt like God has let you down because there were bad consequences happening even though you were trying to do the right thing? Sometimes God doesn't keep us from the lion's den, but he's right there with us in the lion's den. Now, as a kid, Mom and I would drive around and we would listen to Paul Harvey. You guys listen to Paul Harvey? I loved Paul Harvey. Loved listening to his stories. And if we ever got somewhere and he hadn't done his famous the rest of the story, we would sit in the car until we heard the rest of the story. Absolutely loved that. Loved getting to hear him. And maybe you just heard his voice in your head, because I don't really have one of those good and the rest of the story sort of things. This story of Daniel could have stopped at a whole bunch of different places. Could have stopped after the king put this law and signed it into place. And they could have just stopped it there and just left it at that. They could have stopped it after they found Daniel praying and could have stopped the story there, and we could have just kind of wondered, well, I guess he violated the law. Too bad for him. They could have stopped after he was put in the lion's den. Kind of one of those, well, in he goes. We don't know what happened to him. But they didn't. And so we get to hear the rest of the story. We get to hear what happens to Daniel. So now we're in verse 19 through 24. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den, When he got there, he called out in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to come and rescue you from the lions?" And Daniel answered, "Long live the king. My God sent his angels to shut the lion's mouth so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in God. Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. God did come through. He saved Daniel from death by lions. Now, if we were watching a movie of this is the point where the audience would go crazy with applause because we love a good story. We love it to see when the good guy is saved and when the bad guys get exactly what they deserved. And that last part there with the guys who accused Daniel, that could be a whole nother sermon on what we do. Sometimes we think what we do isn't affecting anybody else and it affects everybody, but that's for another day. So what about us? What happens when we do the right things? We stand up for the wrongs. We right the injustices. What about when it appears that God doesn't come through? Now, it doesn't say Daniel said this, but his actions show a paraphrase of Daniel 3:17 and 18. The God I serve is able to deliver me, and he will, but even if he doesn't. So here we are. We're over 2,600 years later after this happened, and we're still talking about Daniel. We're talking about his faith. We're talking about how he responded when the trials came. Now, if we did a quick bullet point of everything that happened, we would say that Daniel knew what he believed what he believed, and he was committed to stand, no matter what, for what he believed. Tough times are going to come. It's just life. No self-fulfilling prophecies here. It's one of those life happens. I've been on Facebook this week. I have seen what some of you are dealing with, and I have just shaken my head and said, God, please help them. Please be with them. I know it's rough. I know that some of you are dealing with stuff that can be so overwhelming. You're like, I don't know what to do, God. Tests of our faith are going to happen. So I have a question for you, teenagers. What are you going to do when you're at school this week and your friends are making fun of you? Why do you get up and go to church on Sunday mornings? You could totally sleep in. You don't have to go. Why do you go to that Wednesday night, Thursday night stuff at your church? It's just a waste of time. How are you going to respond? College kids, you're headed back to school in the fall. Some of our seniors are graduating. You're going to college. And there will be that one professor who's going to be like, you know, you Christians, everything you've been taught, just throw it out the window. It's a whole bunch of hogwash, it's a bunch of lies. Young adults, some of you I know are looking for jobs. You're in a job right now. You're trying to get that better job. Will you stand for what you believe or just do whatever it takes? Compromise your beliefs? Middle adults, my crowd. How are we going to respond to the stuff that the world's throwing at us? When we're told to be more open-minded, when we're told that what we believe is harmful to others, how are we going to stand? Moms, when the kids come up to you and ask you again, why can't I do, all my friends are doing it, what do you mean I can't? Whatever it is. Are you going to cave and just be like, oh, I'm so tired, you're badgering me, leave me alone? Or are you going to hold to what you believe? Dads, men, I know there's temptations in your world that seem so worth it, but are they? Really? Senior adults, I've watched my parents get older. I've seen the trials that happen when your body doesn't work like it used to. Will you grow old gracefully? Will you share what you know with the younger generation? Will you pass along the wisdom, the things that God has taught you over the years? Will you just be bitter and angry with God, asking God where he went? Now, I know I probably didn't hit your exact situation. Again, we've all got different stories, different stuff going on in our life. But let me simply ask, when the moment comes in your life, when you have the choice to stand for God or compromise and cave, what will you do? How will you respond? Join me in prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you. Thank you for always being there. Thank you for coming through, even when we may question and wonder. Sometimes we have to get down the road a ways, and then we can look back and say, okay, I see what you were doing, God. God, I know that each one of us has a different story, a different trial, a different test, different things that are going on, things that are so huge that we just want to throw up our hands and say, I give up, I quit. But God, those are the times when we need to cling to you tightly. Those are the times that we need to say even more so, God, no matter what, I trust you. So I ask God for each one of us that we would hear your spirit, that we would be clear what it is that you would have for each of us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. So today is a great day for a new start. A day that you can leave your past exactly where it belongs, in your past. It's gone, it's over. You can't go back and fix it. You can start from today, and you can go forward. So you could be thinking, you know, that's great for you. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've dealt with. You don't know how many times I've failed. You're right, I don't. But what I do know is that God takes us right as we are. He doesn't ask us to get cleaned up first. He just asks us to turn our lives over to him. This complete surrender to him. This, God, I know you've forgiven me of my sins, but now my life is completely yours, whatever you want. You could be thinking, I gave this God thing a try. I begged, I cried, I prayed, I fasted, I did everything I was supposed to do, and God didn't show up. Would you be willing today to say, okay, God, I don't understand what I've gone through, but today, a new day, a line in the sand, I'm crossing over it. It's going to be a new day where I say I trust you no matter what. So we have these response stations online. You guys can respond as well. There's those buttons at the bottom of the screen that you can respond as well. We have these altars. These altars are a great place to just kneel and talk to God. I've done it a ton. I have memories of many times where I have knelt at these altars and God has said something very clear to me. So if you want to come pray, come pray. We have the cross over here. Online, you've got the cross button. You've got little pieces of paper. Maybe you need to just write down something. Sometimes it's just good for me to just say, God, I'm turning this over to you, and just write it down on the paper and pin it to the cross. We have these candle stations on both sides. Maybe you can go light a candle. A visual reminder of someone or something that you're turning over to him. We also have communion. Online, you can do communion as well. Click the button, it'll tell you how to do it.